Well, really, things still kicking off here. Desiree, thank you so much for coming to us. We are live at Wits University, bringing you the Africa Investigative Journalism Conference, convened by Professor Anton Harber, who is the adjunct professor of Caxton here at Wits University. It really is a special event. It brings together investigative journalists from across the continent, and they've come together to talk about where investigative journalism needs to go next, what kind of support it needs, of course, for it to continue to grow, but also some of the successes that investigative journalism really has had, not just in South Africa, but also on the continent. But I won't do the talking. Let's speak now to Professor Anton Harber himself, who joins me now, the convener of the conference. Prof, a good morning to you. Thank you so much for giving us your time. Talk to us about the importance of holding this conference, how long it's been around, and what you've been able to achieve with it over the past few years.
This is our 18th year, so we've been building it year by year. It started as a small local conference. It grew national, it grew international. Now it's the biggest gathering of working journalists in Africa annually. So it's fantastic. This year we've got 375 registered delegates as of this morning. So it's our biggest ever. This morning we've had presented some work from two Kenyan documentary makers on trafficking and in Kenya, and it really shows what great work is being done across the continent.
Well, you mentioned Kenya. I'm keen to hear who else is here, what countries are represented, particularly because I think on the continent there's a perception that investigative journalism is quite stifled in Africa. And I think a conference like this really showing that there's work being done regardless.
There are many countries where it's difficult to do the work, but we have at least 42 African countries, so it's nearly all represented here in one form or another, ranging from Tunisia, Sierra Leone, Kenya, Nigeria, Mozambique. Fantastic representation. And what's a surprise every year is how much interesting and excellent work is being done in places in unexpected places that is often not seen by the rest of the world. So part of our job is to showcase and highlight great African work.
What do you think is some of the biggest challenges that we see on the continent, particularly where investigative journalism is concerned? And I'm talking now from a resource point of view, because investigative journalism is not cheap.
It's not cheap. So the biggest issue is resources. I would say the two biggest issues are resources and state and sometimes private sector pressure to influence what journalists can or cannot do. Resources is a problem in many countries, not in all, but in many. But what you see is journalists entrepreneurially creating ways in which to do and get their stories out. So it's true, not enough newsrooms are investing in investigative journalism, not enough can, but it's always surprising how much gets done either by some newsrooms or by some determined, committed individuals.
For those that perhaps don't remember, I think go back to some of the extraordinary work that investigative journalists have done, please, Prof. I mean, I mentioned earlier the works of the Gupta leaks, for instance, and even the collaborative effort of journalists in Namibia and South Africa to bring about the Pala Pala story as well. But there were many such examples.
Absolutely true. I mean, part of what we try and highlight is the essential role investigative journalists are playing in this age in an attempt to bring accountability into the whole continent, across the continent. A very good example is a story that started here 5 or 6 years ago and has now become a major story, and that's the lotteries expose. So there was a group of journalists who got together here some years back, and they said, in each of our countries, and they did about half a dozen countries, we are going to examine, take a close look at what our lottery is doing. And it was a collaborate. They shared their way they did it, and they cross-published and assisted each other. It was a very good story from about half a dozen countries, but as we know in South Africa, through determination and persistence, one journalist in particular, Ray Joseph, it's become a big national story. He exposed massive problems and corruption in our lottery, and the police are now on it, and the board is being replaced. So it's a perfect example of how by bringing people together and the persistence of those involved, you can challenge and hold accountable those who have power and wealth.
Well, we're going to be talking as well. Thank you so much, Professor Anton Harber, convener of the Africa Investigative Journalism Conference here at Wits University. We're going to be bringing you more of what comes out here at this conference. We're going to talk a little bit about the public trust that people have in investigative journalists. Is that something we need to look at? How do we improve that? But also, how do we support the work of investigative journalists who essentially work tirelessly to unearth what is hidden and bring the truth to us, and hopefully some accountability coming with that as well.